Imagine standing on a lonely shore where the wind carries the echoes of forgotten battles, and the tide hides secrets buried deep beneath the sand. A loyal creature senses danger before a single word is spoken. A mechanic with a haunted past races against time. And in the shadows of broken machines and shattered memories lies someone who will change everything. What begins as a rescue quickly unravels into a destiny that neither of them could have foreseen. If you are new to the channel, then please subscribe to the channel and like the video, and tell us where are you watching from. Now, let's jump into the story. The morning started with a strange hush, the kind that makes a person stop and listen for what is missing. Mason Fielding was easing a stabilizer coil into place on his hoverbike when the air shifted, heavy and briny, as if the sea had taken a deeper breath. Cobalt, the small blue drake who preferred the warmth of Mason's shoulder to any perch, lifted his pointed ears and tilted his little head. He gave a soft click, then another, faster now. When Cobalt cared, he didn't chatter, he moved. The drake leapt, wing membranes catching the wind, and glided toward the abandoned strand south of Haven Ridge. Mason tightened his pack straps, kicked the hoverbike alive, and chased the flicker of blue that darted over broken beacons and the rib bones of old war machines. The shore was a museum of lost things, cracked escape pods, frayed cables, and faded helmets, each one a story left unspoken. Cobalt spiraled down near a pile of volcanic stone. He whistled, sharp and urgent. Mason parked, boots sinking into the cool sand. The drake's golden eyes fixed on a shadow in the rock's hollow. There, half buried, lay a woman with striped skin the color of dusk and fire. Orange and black bands that would have hidden her in a deep forest, but here made her stand out against the gray shore. Her suit was scorched and torn. She breathed, barely. Mason knelt, steady but swift. 2 fingers found a pulse at the side of her neck, a double rhythm, faint as a whisper. He tipped water to her cracked lips. She coughed, salty and raw. He slid an arm beneath her shoulders, surprised by how light she felt, a weight like a promise about to vanish. Restraint marks ringed her ankle. The burns along her sides looked like weapons that didn't care who they hurt. He saw the brand when he lifted her, a round crest pressed into the inner wrist, not standard issue, not colonial or corporate. It looked older, like a story etched into skin. He had seen an image like it once in a sealed briefing. He told himself it was stress tricking his memory. "We're leaving," he said, though she couldn't answer. Cobalt flared his wings and led them away from the tide's reach. Mason carried her to his hill workshop, tucked behind a swath of tall earth pines, where the wind sounded kinder. It wasn't a clinic, but it was clean, and he kept supplies for the days when machines or people needed help. He sealed her deeper cuts with Smart Gel, set an IV with universal plasma, and sent a course of quiet nanobots to fight the infections chewing at her edges. Outside, the twin suns stepped down the sky. Inside, the soft beeping of monitors kept a slow rhythm, a lullaby for a life choosing to stay. Cobalt refused to roam. He curled against the cot's frame and draped his wings like a tiny cloak. Every so often, he made a little hum that seemed to steady her breathing. Mason took the chair by the door, pulse rifle across his lap, out of habit, more than threat, and watched the security feeds blink through empty trees. Old habits stick, even after wars say they've ended. It took 3 days for her eyes to open. They were amber, vertical pupils narrowing, widening, assessing. Her gaze flicked to Cobalt first. The drake made a pleased trill, and something eased in her face. Her voice, when it came, held a gentle burr. Water. Mason handed a sealed bottle. She drank in small sips, careful and patient. Her eyes floated around the room, naming what mattered without saying it. Exit, vents, tools, possible weapons. He understood the look. Survival rewires how a person sees. Where? She asked. Haven Ridge, outer coast, Mason said. You remember what happened? A silence. A tiny shake of her head that wasn't truth. He didn't push. Sometimes the lie is a bridge back to the self. I'm Mason, he said. He's Cobalt. The Drake puffed up, proud of his name. You, she said at last, fix things. When I can. Thank you. She paused, studied him again. They will come. The words landed like a quiet bell. Not if he could help it. He set the chair closer to the door and waited with the patience of someone who had learned that time, like metal, can be shaped but never rushed. Night fell. The workshop breathed. Cobalt kept his vigil. The woman slept again, no longer on the edge of the dark. Outside, the sea spoke to the sand, slow and certain, as though it knew that the shore had given back someone who still had miles to go. By dawn, color had returned to her skin. The brand on her wrist seemed to pulse with its own memory. When she woke the second time, her shoulders loosened just enough to allow a name. Celine, she said, and held his eyes a moment longer than required. Celine Dustclaw. Mason nodded. Rest, Celine. We'll talk when your voice isn't fighting the tide. She closed her eyes, not in fear now, but in trust, borrowed from a small blue drake and the quiet hands of a man who fixed what he could, even when the rest of the world chose to forget. And because stories like to braid themselves before you notice, somewhere inside the workshop, the future turned its first small gear. The workshop smelled of pine sap and machine oil, a mix that felt like safety. Celine gained strength quickly. Her body devoured nutrients like a furnace finding steady flame. Mason kept bowls of protein broth nearby. Cobalt sat on her shoulder as if he'd been born there, humming when she moved, chirping when she paused, delighted at the sound of her soft purr in return. On the third morning, she stood at the open bay doors, watching the ocean turn copper with the climb of the suns. They mark their property, she said, touching the circular crest on her wrist. Not to honor, but to keep. Mason didn't look at the mark. He looked at Celine. Who are they? The Ashen Cartel, she answered, voice even. They take people from small places where help travels slow. They sell them to ships that forget names. Mason felt something quiet and heavy settle in his chest. He had known of such groups by other names. During the war, darkness found any crack to enter. I took a shuttle from them, Celine said. It fell into the sea. I swam the rest. She did not mention the losses inside those words, and he did not ask her to. Why here? He asked. The current carried me, she said, and your Drake found me. Cobalt, pleased, fanned his winglets. The little dragon had a gift for being where he needed to be. Your brand, Mason said gently, is older than cartel marks. I've seen it in a dusty report. A crest, not a chain. Celine turned her wrist toward the light, the skin there fully healed now. A promise from another life, she whispered. One that burned and changed shape. After that, they worked. Celine helped calibrate sensor grids, her clawed fingers delicate and sure. The way she handled tools told Mason she had trained for things beyond war and beyond courtrooms. She moved with patient intention, like a teacher reminding a student that accuracy is the shortest path to speed. In the evenings, she stood in the doorway and asked Mason quiet questions. Why do you live so far from the settlement? She said once. Less noise, he replied. More sky. And before you fixed machines on a hill, I fixed other things, he said. She nodded, reading the rest in his posture. On the 5th day, Celine traced with a fingertip the edges of an old map Mason kept rolled in a tube. The map showed the northern wastes, which the sun baked into glass and wind carved into teeth. The cartel uses an old processor there, she said. If they lost me, they reset there. They will have others in chains. Mason pulled fresh feed from sensing satellites. He saw irregular heat patterns, the kind a cautious group makes when it wants to look like an empty building. He measured patrol timings by habit, counted bodies by the shape of shadows. We could trigger a false alert, he said slowly. The station is old, and old stations keep secrets. Emergency protocols still cling to the bones. Celine's eyes brightened, pupils thinning the way a hunter's do, when the path finally shows. If the station seals sections and vents air. Guards run, she said. We move during confusion, free the people, and ride the scramble out. Cobalt bounded from her shoulder to the table and stamped his tiny feet, which meant yes or I want snacks. Either way, the timing was excellent. They gathered what they needed. Mason packed compact charges, tools that only looked like tools, and a simple medkit. Celine checked 2 quiet pistols, the small kind that fit her grip, and a coil of line that disappeared into her belt. Cobalt climbed into a pouch across Celine's chest, poked his head out, and blinked like a star. Before they left, Celine stood again at the bay doors. I was promised to a future once, she said, almost as if reciting a memory to make it lighter. A future designed by other hands. Now I choose mine. Her voice did not shake. Mason powered the hoverbike. We bring them home, he said. Simple words, true ones. They roll better than speeches over rough ground. The wasteland rose before them, a quilt of cracked earth and glass dunes that sang when the wind crossed them. Cobalt took to the air, a sliver of blue under the small sun. Celine leaned forward, tail curled for balance, eyes tracing lines on the horizon. It felt like riding toward a line they had been meant to cross. The station grew from the land like a memory refusing to crumble. Pipes, towers, vents, all stitched to a wide central spine. From a distance, it seemed asleep. Close, it smelled like rust and old fear, the kind of scent that lingers when people are forced to wait too long. Mason and Celine slid off the bike in the shadow of a maintenance buttress. He palmed a panel, coaxing it open with a maker probe as small as a wish. The hatch sighed. Air moved like something holding its breath. Inside, the light dimmed to a planned twilight. The halls wore the stains of long use and long neglect. Celine walked like a whisper. Mason counted steps the way he counted turns in wire. Cobalt, now on foot, scurried ahead and paused at every crossway, listening to the air like a song he knew. The plan was simple. Simple plans unravel less under pressure. Still, threads shift. The faint sound of a cry reached them from below, not loud, but full of the kind of tired that breaks even hard stone. Celine looked at Mason. He nodded. Detours are sometimes the doorways that matter most. Fell the echoes of the station change, like a tide thinking about turning. They moved deeper, each step writing the next line of a story neither could have told alone. They found the captives in an old growing bay, the glass above them replaced by dull panels, the soil long since paved with metal. A mix of people sat along the walls, humans, Verdanian with crystal skin gone dim, a pair of striped cubs from Celine's world clinging to each other, and many others. Inhibitor cuffs buzzed like lazy insects around their wrists and ankles. When the door scraped open, fear snapped every head toward the sound. Celine softened her shape, eased her voice into something that belonged beside beds and under blankets. "We're friends," she said. "We're going to try to get you out. Listen and move when we say." Mason knelt by the control panel. The lock was simple. The cuffs were not. He pulled a stolen keycard from a pouch, pressed it to the reader, and watched the lights flip green. The hum cut. One by one, people stood. Muscles surprised I freedom. Cobalt skittered along the wall and popped into a vent. His small claws chittered a rhythm. He would scout ahead where bulkier allies could not go. They had freed half the room when the air changed again. Footsteps, too many, closing fast. Celine's pupils narrowed. She pointed the children to the corner and shielded them with her body. The door slid wide. Guards flooded in, their armor marked with soft gray sigils, and their faces cold with practice. Marrowbrook entered last. He wore a clean suit that did not belong in a place like this. His smile held glass edges. "You bring me gifts," he said, voice smooth. "I remember you, Duskclaw. The auctioneers were quite disappointed when you vanished, and you brought a mechanic with fast hands. How kind." Celine's tail flicked once, a warning to anyone paying attention. "Let them go," she said. "Take me." Merrow's smile widened. "Why choose only one? We can have both." Mason's hand found the small switch on his wrist cuff. Somewhere in the belly of the station, charges he had placed on power trunks considered their purpose. The lights blinked. Sirens stayed silent, then roared alive, a wail song of machinery. With a shudder, the station's old protocols woke. Heavy doors slammed down the halls, cutting corridors into short breaths. Red warning lamps pulsed, and steel shutters rolled across unsealed windows. The emergency system announced a containment breach in a metallic voice that had not spoken in years. Chaos likes company. In the staggered light, Celine moved. She was motion and pause, grace and angle. She flowed through the first line of guards with a dancer's exactness. Mason stayed low and fast, not wasting shots, drawing fire away from the cluster of the weak and the young. Cobalt dropped from the vent above the tallest guard, puffing a sharp crackle of blue haze that made the armored figure lock and shudder. Muscles numb in a sudden storm. "Move," Mason said, pointing captives toward the back exit. "Stay low. Stay together." A human teenager grabbed the hand of a Verdanian elder. They ran side by side. Marrow tried to stand above the chaos. He pulled a sleek pistol and aimed at the woman whose life he had once priced. Celine met his gaze with steady calm. "You counted wrong," she said. A second pulse, this one from Cobalt, rolled across the front line. Guards staggered. The pistol clattered. Mason's shoulder met a charging body at the right angle, and a path opened like a curtain torn down. They ran through passageways that had been made to grow food and now grew fear. The station sealed itself in segments and released control in others. Older systems often confuse themselves when asked to do too much. Mason used that confusion like a doorway. Celine stayed at the rear, ushering everyone forward, claws only when necessary. The shuttle bay should have been a clean path, but stories get stubborn near the end of a chapter. 10 more guards waited by the exits, teeth bared in their own private way. Marrow limped behind them, anger cracking through the polish. "Back to your cages," he said, "or learn how cold space can be." Celine lifted her chin. "You don't scare me," she said, calm as a lake, "and you will not scare them again." A small device clicked in her hand, unseen until that moment. Mason recognized the housing, not explosive, signal. The fuel alarm screamed. Somewhere below, a cut valve sprayed into a place that did not welcome it. The bay's floor vibrated with a warning like a heartbeat running fast. Guards froze, then broke. Marrow flinched as heat rolled along the ceiling. "You wouldn't," he started. But by then no one believed his version of the story. People bolted for the nearest shuttle. Mason at the helm, Celine by the door, Cobalt perched and bright-eyed, counting heads his own way. The last child up the ramp turned back to stare at Marrow. Celine gently covered the child's eyes and steered them away. The shuttle engines screamed in their joyful language, and they rose as the bay behind them bloomed with light. The shockwave turned their flight into a tumble, but Mason flew like he fixed. Clean, careful, never panicked. Celine strapped down the last passenger, and then herself, and Cobalt braced against the window, humming low to calm the frightened. Outside, the station folded into itself like a bad idea collapsing under truth. They cleared the flame, caught the air, and surged toward the coast. Later, at Haven Ridge, the marshals frowned at the story, and then could not deny the people in front of them, or the records Mason handed over. The Ashen Cartel's local spine snapped. A dozen survivors found families. Those without found warm beds and names remembered. Celine sat on the workshop step that night, Cobalt in her lap, and watched the sea make slow silver lines. "They will build somewhere else," she said. "And we will take them apart somewhere else," Mason replied. He turned the key to a ship that had been waiting in storage, a lean vessel he called the Starlight's Mercy. The name felt right in the air. Mercy moves fast when it is needed. Together with a tiny dragon who insisted he was larger than he looked, they drew a new line on their map. It pointed away from the place where the story began and toward the places that needed a story to arrive. The Starlight's Mercy learned the routes that never made official charts. She slid through asteroid thickets, drifted along silence where beacons went dark, and appeared like a kind rumor over moons where trouble wore friendly clothes. Mason found allies among old veterans who trusted his quiet voice. Celine made friends with people who had grown used to not being believed. Cobalt made friends with everyone, because joy travels fast when it has wings. Their crew grew like a garden planted by careful hands. Juno, a calm pilot who could feel currents through her fingertips. Benna, a human who had studied locks more than books and knew how to open both. Ranar, a Verdanian engineer with a gentle laugh like wind chimes. And Dr. Albie, a doctor whose pocket was always full of sweets for nervous children. Each had reasons, but more important, each had resolve. Raids turned into rescues. Small cells in the Ashen Cartel fell like brittle twigs. Rumors stitched a legend. A small ship with a blue glimmer would appear when everything felt lost. Cut ropes, open doors, leave a mark on the world that looked like breath returning. Then came whispers of a roving auction called the Hush Market, a drifting city built from a repurposed colony hull, always on the move. The Hush Market was a place where lost names were sold. No single ship could face it. Celine's plan felt unreasonable the second she said it, which is how you know it might work. "We bait them," she said. "We pretend we are selling someone they want more than anyone." Mason rubbed the back of his neck. "And who do they want?" She looked at him with a softness that had weight. "You," she said. "Decorated once, skilled now, stubborn always. They'll believe you are prize and threat." Mason shook his head. "I don't love this. I love you enough for both," she said. And the joke made the fear sit down quietly. They built a disguise. Dr. Albie crafted a false implant that looked like memory fog, but only whispered to Cobalt when to act. Juno prepared an exit path that wound through 3 layers of patrols. Benna copied Hush Market credentials so perfect the system would complement them before opening. On the day, Mason's hands were steady. He let himself be led by people who thought they owned him. When scanners warmed, their needle caught the ghost of a Cigna. The lead buyer frowned. "He's pinging." The room tightened. A woman named Vela, with lenses instead of eyes and a voice like a blade on glass, lifted a hand to end the problem. Cobalt dropped from an overhead vent and changed the ending. His strongest cloud spilled like a bluebell broken in the air. Half the guards went limp, and the rest fumbled for masks and reasons. Celine arrived like a shadow, choosing a shape. She moved with the force and focus of a storm that knows exactly which trees it means to spare. The Mercy's allies slid out of folds in space. 3 colonial captains who had learned that paperwork can be a wall or a bridge depending on who writes it. They became a bridge that day. Together they turned the Hush Market from a rumor into a broken thing that would never again be what it was. In the weeks that followed, more ships joined a loose braid of rescue. Small captains with big hearts, quiet officers with loud consciences. They pooled tips, shared safehouse, and ran supply lines that did not show on ledgers. Someone in a high office decided that looking away felt worse than looking on, and a proposal crawled through the channels toward the Mercy. Lead an official task force with teeth and a shield. "It's a cage if we let it be," Celine said, brow furrowed. "Or it's an engine if we build it," Mason replied. They chose to build. They set terms in ordinary words that even offices could understand. No orders that asked them to forget why they began. No missions that used people as numbers. No secrets that trapped the wrong ones. Time, patient and clever, gave them other gifts. Mason and Celine married in the cargo bay of the Mercy, strings of lights making gentle stars. Juno spoke the words. Cobalt carried rings he dropped exactly twice. Later, a different kind of light came into their lives. Twins arrived, small and fierce, named Nolan and Sable. The crew's laughter gave the babies a world to learn. Work changed shape, but kept its soul. Celine coordinated more from the bridge, while the twins slept in baskets, hooked to the railing. Mason took ground teams where the halls leaned and the lights flickered. Cobalt refused to be far from the family and invented new ways to be both scout and sitter. Years moved like a story that knows its direction. The Mercy grew into a fleet. Too many worlds needed help. They commissioned a new ship, not to replace the Mercy, but to carry the weight the work demanded. They called her Liberation. She was not bigger only in size. She was bigger in purpose, with rooms for survivors to breathe and plan and begin again. On a quiet shift, exactly 10 years after Cobalt had found Celine on that lonely shore, a chime sounded. A rescued Verdanian bookkeeper asked to speak on the bridge. Her crystalline skin remained pale from hunger's memory, but her voice was clear. "I kept records," she said. "They thought I was only counting credits, but I counted routes and safe words and ports pretending to be clean. I have names. I have times. I have where the next web is being woven right now." Celine looked at Mason. Mason looked at Cobalt, whose muzzle had begun to gray, but whose eyes still held mischief. The drake lifted his head and chirped once, bright and sure. The main screen glowed with the bookkeeper's map, lines threading through quiet systems, dots where a door could open, circles where a whisper could become a rescue. The crew gathered, Juno with her steady hands, Benna with a grin that promised locks had not met their match, Ranner already calculating fuel and chances, Dr. Albee slipping sweets to 2 fidgeting teens who were not so small anymore. Celine set her palm to the console and let her voice fill the room like a tide moving in. "Then let's begin," she said. The routes blossomed outward. Messages zipped to ships that waited in patient orbit around possibility. The twins leaned forward, eyes bright, their future not forced upon them, but offered, one choice at a time. Cobalt hopped to his perch above the captain's chair, wrapped his tail around the rail, and watched Hope redraw the map. The little Drake had started it by refusing to ignore a breath that might have faded. Now he oversaw 100 small beginnings, stitched into something wide and good. Beyond the viewports, space stretched in every direction, busy with stars and promises. The story did not end. It changed shape again and again, the way a river does when it learns a new bend. And that, Mason thought, as Celine's hand found his and squeezed, is the best kind of ending. One that keeps opening, turning work into wonder, and wonder into the next good thing.